Welcome back. The frequent collapse of Nigeria's national grid has generated serious concern, intensifying an ongoing energy crisis that continues to disrupt daily life and destabilize the country's economy. For context, the national grid has collapsed 162 times in the last 11 years. That's according to the Association of Power Generating Companies. In 2024 alone, the grid has failed 8 times, with 3 incidents occurring in just 1 week. Blackouts were reported in several states across the country. Following the latest collapse, the Minister of Power, Adebayo Adelabu, has summoned the leadership of the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission and the Transmission Company of Nigeria, TCN, to an emergency meeting after expressing displeasure at the incident, which he said was capable of tarnishing the improvement made in the last 1 year. According to the minister, the improvement has led to an increased generation and distribution of 5,527 megawatts, a record generation in 3 years. Meanwhile, the House of Representatives has also directed its Committee on Power to investigate the frequent national grid collapses and provide a report. These persistent collapses also raise critical questions about the ability of the TCN to stabilize the grid, despite the federal government's multi-billion-dollar investment in the power sector. Well, let's discuss this further. I'm now joined by the Executive Director, NEPA Wahala NG, Emeka Ojoko, who joins us from Port Harcourt, the Rivers State capital. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Ojoko. Now, how worrisome is the frequent collapse of Nigeria's grid? 162 times in 11 years, 8 times this year alone, is quite alarming.
Yes, it's worrisome because what it simply speaks about is that our infrastructure for transmission and distribution of electricity has not yet been revamped over the years. Okay, that's the reason for this frequent disruptions in power supply. Whenever there is a grid imbalance, just like a circuit breaker in your house, if there's a power surge, the circuit breaker is meant to trip off everything in your house so that there's no damage. So the grid is meant to shut itself down whenever there's an imbalance in the grid so that there is no damage to the entire network. Okay, and these imbalances are caused typically by aged, dilapidated equipment. Okay, the discos have not really fulfilled their contractual obligations to inject capital to boost their distribution infrastructure. So with this aged equipment that we are using, we'll find that these collapses will occur more and more, except there is an upgrade in our distribution and transmission infrastructure.
Right. Now, some of these collapses have been linked to infrastructure deficiencies, like you said. Others are gas supply challenges and limitations within the Transmission Company of Nigeria, TCN. However, the Nigerian Power Consumers Forum has suggested that sabotage by hoodlums may be behind some of these grid collapses. Could there be any truth to this claim?
Yes, well, I've seen the reports of some incidents of sabotage, and whenever those high voltage transmission lines are sabotaged by unknown persons, we will have those issues. Okay, the entire system will shut down until those things are put back in place. But those are isolated cases. But the more frequent occurrences are the ones that happen when there's an imbalance in the grid and the system just shuts itself down naturally. Okay, if you check the percentage of sabotage-induced shutdown collapses, it will maybe be like 5% of the figures that you threw out earlier. Okay, so the major cause, as I said, is infrastructure deficit, as you pointed out, are responsible for the things that we are seeing. And until there is a major upgrade of our infrastructure, these things will be more the norm than the exception.
Now, back in August, the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission issued permits to selected mega brands in the country to build mini-grid electricity generation plant in the country. The commission also granted permits to build 4 captive generation plants across Lagos State alone, with 15.94 megawatts capacity. You also contributed to that conversation on this program. Now, how far will this go in addressing the problem if and when implemented?
Mini grids are meant to provide for unserved or underserved segments of the country, typically the rural communities, which we don't get the kind of supply that the urban areas get. Okay, so I don't expect those mini grids to solve the problem so much. But for the cities like I don't know whether they granted, I can't remember whether any was granted for Lagos State, but if any has been granted in the urban areas, and then they're able to come to agreements with the discos in those areas to enable them to serve certain segments of those communities, then it could take the load off the distribution systems within the rest of that state, that city, right, and then give more power available for the other people who are now on those mini grids, right? For those who are not on the mini grids to have more power supply. What this means is this: basically that for people who are in the lesser served bands, band A is guaranteed 20 and above, band B 16 and above, and so on and so forth. For those ones, there will be more power available to serve them, and they can now be assured of more power since there are less customers for the discos to cater for who have now moved to the mini grid.
Now, talking about the different bands, up until now, there's not been a specific differentiation, should I say, between these different bands. You see some other, let's say, people on band B, C, and so on, complain that they have been placed on band A. I mean, why is there so much confusion around this issue of separation into, different bands regarding electricity supply?
Okay. Part of the problem is lack of communication on the part of the discos. Usually when they move the customers from the lower band to a higher band, they don't communicate with them. All they see is that there's an increment in their bills. And then when they check their tariffs, right, for those who are on estimated billing, they see that the tariff classification has moved from 60-something naira to 200 and something naira. That's how they know that they've moved to band A. There's no communication from the discos before they migrate them, which they should do. They should notify these customers before they do so. Okay, but for those who are on lesser bands who are being moved to higher bands, I'm aware that NEC has outsourced the monitoring of power supply to independent parties to actually confirm the data that the discos have been given to them to know whether people who are on band A are actually getting band A supply. And based on the data being generated by those independent parties, when the discos fail to meet the minimum standard of supply for 7 consecutive days, then they are required to migrate them to a lower band until they can establish that they can sustain 20 hours a day for the next 30 days. So that measure is in place, but I don't know whether they're actually measuring for the people who are being migrated. Well, they should be. They should be, because before the disco can migrate, they must get NEC approval, right? They must get NEC approval before they can move you from any lower band to a higher band. Okay, but the challenge here, as I said, is lack of communication, right? The sector is so opaque. The discos don't do a good job letting their customers know the reasons for differentiation in their power supply. So that's the gap that organizations like mine aim to fill, to let the customers know that this is the reason why you may be experiencing higher supply or lower supply, as the case may be. And then if you're being billed for supply that is higher than what you're getting, then we have an avenue for you to get redress from the regulator or from your disco.
And finally, you would agree that, the frequent collapse of Nigeria's power grid poses a severe threat to the country's economic development, especially now that many Nigerians find it difficult to afford alternative power sources like, generators or inverters, given. Let's talk about generators now, given the increase in petrol price in the country. Now, do you think that the government is addressing this power supply challenge as it should?
The government has to push the stakeholders in the industry to boost distribution infrastructure. Right. Right now we generate about 5,000 megawatts, right, that we're able to evacuate to the network. But we have an installed capacity of 13,000. We don't use it. Why? Because the network cannot carry it. And even if the network can carry it, can we pay for it? right? Right now, we're talking about band A, about the high cost of band A. But looking at it relatively, right, across other electricity industries, our cost of power typically is lower than most other countries, right? It's lower than it. But the only thing is that the standard of living in those countries is higher. The earning capacity of the people of those countries is higher than what we have in Nigeria. But the cost of power is still cheap. Now, we had a situation where I lived a couple of days ago, right, where we didn't have power, that the high tension line got cut, and we didn't have power for like 2 days. The amount of money it cost me to run my house for that period, right, for just those 2 days, is the amount of money it will cost me to power my house on band A for 1 week. So electricity is still cheaper than running an alternative power supply, except you have solar, right? And for solar, you know that the challenge is the initial installation cost, right? Once you've installed it, then you begin to have some peace, right, in terms of your energy, cost of energy. But public power supply is still a cheaper means of powering industries than alternative power supply. But the challenge is that Nigeria is, the most of us are too poor. We can't afford this high cost. You can imagine that for an average household on band A, you're looking at spending maybe about 200, 250,000, say 150 to 250 in that range every month to power your house. You're living maybe in a 3-bedroom apartment with the standard equipment. How many middle class people earn that amount in Nigeria? What's the minimum wage? 70,000 naira. So how many people can afford power at that? So we need to, while we agree that the cost of power, yes, is relative to other countries, is not so expensive, right? But we need to, government needs to boost the earning capacity of the people of this country. Government needs to reduce the opacity in the sector. Government needs to reduce the avenues of corruption in the system, right? So that people can have more confidence that this pain that we are going through as a nation, that some people are not sitting somewhere and they're cashing out on it. That's the conundrum that this government has to face. And I hope that you're able to solve it before the next election cycle comes around.
Well, I do share that hope with you. Mr. Emeka Ojoko, the Executive Director, NEPA Wahala NG, thank you very much, sir, for sharing your thoughts as always.
Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure.
Thank you. We'll take another break, and when we come back, the conversation will continue. Just stay with us.
Opinions are free, facts are sacred, but truth is universal.
How, in practical terms, can we, for instance, de-escalate the tension?
When you go into public office, you must be ready to answer to the people.
We know where the enemy is. 3 places. The Lake Chad Basin, the border area between Nigeria and Cameroon, and then the Sambisa Forest.
On DEJI360, we give you a complete dose of everything. Opinion, facts, and undiluted truth.
I hardly believe what politicians say in this part of the world.
A new Nigeria is possible, a future is possible.
We delve into the issues, dissect it so that you can understand it, use it to take action.
I don't think there's any need for any governor to look for grant for ranching.
DEJI360, dissecting the issues.